Hello, it's Andrea again. My final report back, actually from the Copenhagen airport. So last night it sounded like there was a deal, but there was much confusion and anger and many different things happening in the Bella Center. We had President of the United States, Barack Obama, announce a Copenhagen Accord with several other states. Now, my understanding of what happened in the Bella Center, there was a lack of, apparently a lack of these accords being shared with certain people. There wasn't enough copies, there wasn't translation, there was sort of mass confusion. And then there's this questionable point about whether this Copenhagen Accord is actually a deal or not, because in fact it does have to go through certain UN processes, and there's a real challenging on behalf of global South countries with, say, the democratic process of the UN was undermined last night. And in fact, we're finding out now, if you check into news reports, hearing from a couple of folks who are still in the Bella Center, that negotiations went well into the morning, the wee hours of the morning. And in fact, negotiations are ongoing at the Bella Center. There's a real resistance from global South countries to the Copenhagen Accord. Simply just doesn't cut it when it comes to targets, when it comes to climate financing. There's the ongoing concerns with climate financing under the 100 billion a year proposed by Hillary Clinton. There's a concern about the sources of funding in terms of reliance on carbon markets and carbon offsets through clean development mechanisms. There's a concern over conditions when it comes to the U.S. suggesting that there would need to be conditions for how mitigation and adaptation efforts are monitored, and that is facing resistance. There's also concerns about the role of the World Bank potentially in managing the funds, but fundamentally there's just a lack of recognizing within a legally binding text that we must go to the 350 parts per million target. We must not exceed 1.5 degrees if we're going to avert or attempt to avert the worst of the climate crises in terms of the impact. So on the one hand, it's good to hear that the process is ongoing, because certainly this Copenhagen Accord, if it moves forward, is not the be-all, end-all. It can't be, because it just doesn't cut it. It's good to see that G77 countries are in there negotiating and saying, lives are on the line. This is unacceptable. The process here has been undemocratic. We must challenge this. It needs to be democratic, and it needs to respond to the very seriousness of the crisis. Now, what is going on inside with the deal, I must say, I feel, and the Council of Canadians, when our presence in Copenhagen, we feel the real success is what came out of the climate justice movement this week. We saw an incredible coalition of different networks and organization of peoples coming together and standing on the principles of climate justice, be it deep emission targets, recognition of historical responsibilities for emissions, the need for climate financing, but also recognizing and challenging false solutions like carbon offsets, which allow corporations to continue to pollute in developing countries or the global north by buying questionable offsets in the global south, which evidence is increasingly showing oftentimes don't actually reduce emissions and in fact cause a lot of social and environmental harm. This is actually in our background paper, and we'll increasingly be talking more about carbon offsets in the international context, but also the domestic context in Canada. But there's been a real calling out of what those false solutions are, and a real promotion of what real solutions are. What should be on the table is a global moratorium on new fossil fuel development. Fundamentally, really that's where we need to go, and a serious investment in energy alternatives, but not just new energy and putting more energy into the system, but first and foremost, conservation and increased energy efficiency. We must move towards that. And that's intricately tied with recognizing how all of this is tied to an economic system based on a growth model that's just not sustainable. And we need to see the root causes of the climate crisis and unsustainable production, consumption, and trade in order to deal with it. That's what the climate justice movement is saying. And the Seattle moment of the Reclaim the Power March on December 16th, that was a powerful moment. And I believe we're going to see that as a day that we'll look back in history as a powerful moment and a turning point for the climate justice movement that's just not going to stop until it gets heard.